take a deep breath, and let's hear a story about Helena, a girl who had transformed her experience into something meaningful for others. The sunlight filtered through Helena's bedroom curtains, casting gentle patterns across her walls. She watched the dancing light from her bed, where she had spent countless hours since the accident. The soft cotton sheets felt cool beneath her fingertips as she traced small circles, listening to birds chirping outside. Her once athletic body now felt foreign to her, the muscles in her legs refusing to cooperate the way they once did with such natural ease. Helena's small apartment was filled with reminders of her former life, climbing deer neatly organized on hooks, photographs of summit achievements, and medals from trail competitions she had won. Each morning she would gaze at these mementos with a mixture of longing and grief, feeling the weight of loss with each labored breath. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine the feeling of mountain air filling her lungs, the satisfying ache of muscles working in harmony. The accident had happened 6 months ago on a routine climb, a sudden rockslide that had changed everything in an instant. The doctors had explained her injuries with clinical precision: spinal trauma, nerve damage, partial paralysis that might improve with time and endless therapy. The words had washed over her like cold water, leaving her numb and disconnected from the reality of her new limitations. Friends had visited in the beginning, their eyes filled with a pity that made Helena's stomach turn with discomfort. Gradually, the visits became less frequent as everyone returned to their busy lives of adventure and movement. She found herself withdrawing further into isolation, the walls of her apartment becoming the boundaries of her shrinking world. Each morning began the same way, a struggle to move from bed to wheelchair, small exercises that left her exhausted, and the constant companion of pain that hummed through her body. Helena would make herself tea, the warm cup cradled between her palms, breathing in the aromatic steam that carried hints of chamomile and honey. These small sensory moments became her anchors in days that stretched endlessly before her. Her physical therapy appointments were the only disruption to her solitude. Twice-weekly sessions that she approached with a mixture of determination and dread. The clinic was bright and impersonal, filled with others working through their own rehabilitation journeys with varying degrees of success. Helena would watch them from beneath lowered lashes, wondering if they too felt the strange disconnect between who they were and who they had become. It was during one such appointment that Helena first met Taylor, a new therapist with kind eyes and strong, gentle hands. Unlike the other professionals who had worked with her, Taylor didn't approach her with clinical detachment or forced cheerfulness. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in the way he assessed her movements, an intuitive sense of when to push and when to pause. "Your body remembers more than you think," he told her that first day, helping her through a series of stretches that made her muscles tremble with effort. His voice was low and melodic, like water flowing over smooth stones in a stream. "We just need to remind it one small movement at a time, with patience and kindness. Something in his words penetrated the protective shell Helena had built around herself. Perhaps it was the absence of false promises, the acknowledgement that this journey would be difficult but possible. As she lay on the therapy mat, feeling the solid support beneath her back, she found herself truly breathing deeply for the first time in months. Taylor's approach was different from the other therapists she had worked with before. He incorporated elements of meditation and mindfulness into their sessions, teaching Helena to focus on the sensations in her body without judgment. Feel the weight of your body against the floor, he would guide, his voice creating a soothing rhythm to match her breath. Notice where there is tension, where there is ease. Outside the windows of the therapy room, Helena could see trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves creating patterns of light and shadow across the floor. There was something hypnotic about watching this natural movement while working to rediscover movement in her own body. The contrast between the tree's effortless dance and her own labored efforts no longer felt quite so painful. After several sessions, Helena learned that Taylor had his own story of recovery. He had been a competitive swimmer until a car accident left him with injuries similar to her own. The revelation came not as a dramatic confession, but as a simple sharing between two people who understood loss intimately. "The water feels different to me now," he said quietly. "Not worse, just different. I had to learn to move with it in new ways." Helena found herself looking forward to her therapy appointments, the hours with Taylor becoming bright points in her otherwise monotonous days. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her body began responding to the consistent work. Small victories accumulated, holding her balance for a few seconds longer, transferring from wheelchair to therapy table with slightly more ease, muscles awakening from their traumatized sleep. 1 month into working with Taylor, he suggested they try a new approach to Helena's therapy. "I think you're ready to reconnect with nature," he said, wheeling her chair toward the clinic's small garden area. The space was modest but thoughtfully designed, with smooth paths winding between raised flower beds and a small fountain that created a gentle, continuous melody of falling water. Helena felt a flutter of anxiety as they moved outdoors, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she had spent time in open spaces. The sensation of sunlight on her skin felt almost overwhelming, the scent of earth and growing things bringing a rush of memories from her climbing days. Taylor seemed to sense her emotional response, giving her time to adjust without pressing her to speak. They began with simple exercises focusing on upper body strength that would help Helena manage her wheelchair with greater independence. The garden provided natural motivation, reaching to touch a flower, extending toward the branches of a small tree, turning to follow the path of a butterfly. Each movement was purposeful rather than clinical, connecting Helena to the world around her rather than just to her limitations. Close your eyes and feel the sun on your face, Taylor suggested during one session as Helena rested between exercises. Notice how the warmth spreads across your skin, how your breath deepens naturally in response. The practice of mindful attention was gradually teaching Helena to inhabit her body again, to recognize sensations beyond pain and frustration. She found herself noting the pleasant weight of afternoon sunlight, the cooling touch of a passing breeze. As weeks passed, their sessions expanded to include visits to a local park where the terrain offered new challenges. Taylor would walk beside Helena's wheelchair, occasionally offering support, but increasingly allowing her to navigate the gentle slopes and varying textures of the paths. The park became familiar territory, a safe space for Helena to practice her growing skills and rediscover the pleasure of being outdoors. It was during one of these park sessions that Helena first verbalized her deep fear. "What if this is as good as it gets?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "What if I never climb again, never feel that freedom?" The question had lived within her since the accident, growing heavier with each passing day, but speaking it aloud somehow lessened its power. Taylor sat beside her on a park bench, their shoulders almost touching as they gazed at the distant hills that rimmed the city. "I asked myself the same question after my accident," he admitted. "I wanted my old life back exactly as it was. But eventually I realized that wasn't the right question." He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful and open. "The better question might be, what new heights can you reach now?" Taylor continued. "Not the same mountains, perhaps, but different peaks that require different kinds of strength and courage." His words settled around Helena like falling leaves, not demanding immediate response, but creating space for new possibilities to take root in her thinking. That evening at home, Helena found herself drawn to her bookshelf, to journals from past climbing expeditions that she had avoided looking at since the accident. With trembling fingers, she opened one, tracing the enthusiastic handwriting that documented challenges faced and overcome. What had drawn her to climbing hadn't been just a physical achievement, but the process of problem solving, of finding paths where none seemed to exist. The realization struck her with surprising force. Those qualities hadn't disappeared with her physical abilities. The determination, creativity, and resilience that had made her a successful climber were still part of who she was. She fell asleep that night with the journal open beside her, dreams filled not with loss, but with landscapes waiting to be explored in new ways. At their next session, Helena shared her insights with Taylor, who responded with quiet enthusiasm. "I think you're ready for something more challenging," he said, revealing his plan for their next phase of therapy. He had arranged for Helena to work with an adaptive sports program that specialized in helping people with disabilities reconnect with outdoor activities they loved. The program offered specialized equipment and trained guides who understood both the technical aspects of outdoor sports and the unique challenges faced by participants. Helena's first session involved using a hand cycle on a flat, scenic trail that wound alongside a river. The unfamiliar equipment was frustrating at first, her arms burning with exertion after just a short distance. But there was something undeniably exhilarating about moving through space under her own power again, feeling the rush of air against her face as she gained momentum. The program instructors were patient and matter-of-fact, treating Helena's struggles not as limitations but as normal parts of the learning process. By the end of the session, she had managed nearly a mile, her hands blistered but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. Week by week, Helena's endurance improved, her upper body strength developing to compensate for what her legs could not do. The hand cycle became an extension of herself, responding to her commands with increasing precision. She began exploring longer routes, rediscovering the meditative state that came with rhythmic movement and focused attention to the changing terrain. Through the adaptive sports program, Helena met others with similar stories, former athletes, outdoor enthusiasts, adventure seekers who had faced life-altering injuries or conditions. Their camaraderie was different from what she had known in her climbing community, less competitive and more supportive, with a shared understanding of both loss and rediscovery. For the first time since the accident, Helena found herself laughing freely, sharing stories without the heavy filter of what had been lost. One woman in particular, a former marathon runner named Sophia, became a close friend and informal mentor. "It's like learning a new language," Sophia told her during a rest break on a challenging trail. "At first, everything feels impossible and foreign, but then one day you realize you're not translating anymore. You're just living in this new way of being in the world." The metaphor resonated deeply with Helena, who had indeed felt like a foreigner in her own life since the accident. She began to notice how her perception was shifting, how she was starting to see possibilities rather than just barriers. The world was opening up again, not in the same way as before, but in ways that were gradually becoming familiar and even satisfying. Taylor continued to work with Helena throughout this time, adapting their therapy sessions to support her growing involvement with adaptive sports. He taught her techniques for managing pain and fatigue, for listening to her body's signals without being limited by fear. "Recovery isn't linear," he reminded her often. "There will be setbacks and plateaus. The key is to keep moving forward, even if sometimes it's just in your mind." These words proved prophetic when Helena experienced a significant setback, an inflammation of old injuries that left her bedridden for nearly 2 weeks. The forced inactivity brought back echoes of earlier despair, the fear that all her progress might be lost. But something had fundamentally changed in how Helena responded to challenges. Instead of spiraling into hopelessness, she turned to the mindfulness practices Taylor had taught her. Lying in bed, Helena would scan her body with curious attention rather than frustration, noting sensations without judgment. She practiced visualizing the routes she had been learning to navigate, mentally rehearsing the movements that had become part of her new physical vocabulary. When negative thoughts arose, she acknowledged them but didn't allow them to define her experience. This is temporary, she reminded herself, breathing deeply into areas of tension. When she was finally able to return to her activities, Helena approached them with new wisdom and patience. She paid closer attention to the signals her body sent, respecting its limits while still gently expanding its capabilities. The setback had taught her valuable lessons about recovery, that it wasn't about constant forward motion, but about resilience, about returning to the path with renewed awareness. By the 1-year anniversary of her accident, Helena had achieved milestones she couldn't have imagined in those early dark days. She had completed a 5-mile adaptive cycling event, raising funds for the program that had been so instrumental in her recovery. She had learned to use specialized climbing equipment that allowed her to experience modified versions of her beloved sport. Most importantly, she had rediscovered joy in movement and connection with the natural world. On a crisp autumn morning, Helena woke before dawn with a sense of peaceful anticipation. Today marked the culmination of months of preparation, an adaptive climbing event at a specially designed outdoor facility. Taylor would be there, not as her therapist but as her climbing partner and friend. They had trained together for this moment, developing a system of communication and support that honored both Helena's new abilities and her extensive climbing experience. The climbing wall had been adapted to accommodate various disabilities, with routes designed specifically for climbers using adaptive equipment. Helena had practiced extensively with her specialized gear, learning to leverage her upper body strength and the limited movement she had regained in her legs. The technical challenges were different from traditional climbing, but required the same focus, problem solving, and body awareness that she had always loved about the sport. As Helena prepared for the day, she moved through her morning routine with practiced ease. The motions that had once been frustratingly difficult now flowed with greater fluidity, her body and mind working in harmony rather than opposition. She prepared a breakfast of oatmeal with fresh berries, savoring the varying textures and the natural sweetness that burst across her tongue with each bite. These small moments of sensory pleasure had become important anchors in her daily life. The drive to the climbing facility was filled with anticipation rather than anxiety. Helena watched the landscape change through the window, mountains appearing on the horizon like old friends waiting to reconnect. The familiar silhouettes against the brightening sky reminded her of countless drives to climbing sites in her previous life. But the emotion they evoked was no longer painful nostalgia, but something closer to homecoming. When she arrived at the site, Helena was greeted by a community that had gradually become her new tribe. Fellow adaptive athletes called out welcomes. Instructors reviewed the day's plan with enthusiasm, and Taylor waited with their gear already organized. The atmosphere was one of celebration and shared purpose. Everyone there united by their love of climbing and their determination to experience it in whatever way their bodies allowed. "Ready for this?" Taylor asked as he helped Helena into her specialized harness, his movements efficient but unhurried. The question encompassed more than just the day's climb. It acknowledged the journey that had brought her to this moment of returning to the activity she had thought lost forever. Helena nodded, feeling a deep sense of readiness that went beyond physical preparation. The climbing began with simpler routes, allowing participants to warm up and become comfortable with the equipment and environment. Helena moved with growing confidence, her body remembering the rhythm of climbing, even as it adapted to new techniques. The sensation of ascending, of solving the three-dimensional puzzle presented by each section of the wall, awakened joy that radiated through her entire being. As she climbed higher, Helena became increasingly aware of the beauty surrounding them. The facility had been built in a natural setting, with views extending across valleys to distant peaks. The morning light illuminated everything with a soft golden glow, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wild herbs. Each sense was engaged in the experience: the rough texture of holds beneath her fingers, the sound of encouragement from below, the expansive vista that opened with each upward movement. At a rest point halfway up the wall, Helena paused to catch her breath and survey the world below. From this vantage point, she could see the entire gathering: climbers in various adaptive devices, supporters and guides, the community that had formed around this shared passion. The perspective shifted something inside her, a final releasing of the grief that had accompanied her throughout recovery. "I never thought I'd see the world from up high again," she called down to Taylor, who was relaying her with steady attention. The wind carried her words clearly in the morning air, her voice strong and clear, where once it might have wavered with emotion. "It's different than before, but maybe that's the point. I'm seeing things I never noticed when climbing was easy." The final section of the climb presented the greatest challenge, an overhang that required precise movement and complete trust in both equipment and partner. Helena approached it methodically, applying the problem-solving skills she had refined through months of physical therapy and adaptive training. Each movement was deliberate, her focus absolute as she navigated the complex sequence required to move beyond the obstacle. When Helena finally pulled herself over the edge to the platform at the top, the achievement felt both personal and shared. Taylor secured her safely before climbing up to join her, his face reflecting the significance of the moment. Together they sat in companionable silence, absorbing the panoramic view and the journey that had brought them to this summit, not just the day's climb, but the long path of recovery and reinvention. Other climbers gradually joined them on the platform, creating a spontaneous gathering of individuals who understood exactly what this moment meant. Stories were exchanged, not just of accidents and limitations, but of discoveries and new beginnings. Helena listened with deep appreciation, recognizing pieces of her own experience in each narrative shared. The isolation that had defined her early recovery had been replaced by profound connection. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Helena felt a subtle shift in her perception of time. Each moment seemed to expand, filled with sensory richness and emotional depth that demanded nothing but presence. The weight of the past and anxiety about the future temporarily suspended, leaving only the reality of this perfect day, this achievement, this community of support and understanding. The descent was as meaningful as the climb, requiring different skills and awareness. Helena moved downward with respectful caution, each successful movement a reminder of how far she had come. When her feet touched the ground again, she was greeted with congratulations and knowing smiles from others who had completed their own routes. The shared accomplishment created a palpable atmosphere of collective joy. That evening, a small celebration was held around a campfire, the climbing community gathering to mark the day's achievements. As darkness settled around them, the fire cast a warm glow on faces animated with conversation and laughter. Helena found herself sharing stories of her former climbing adventures, but now without the sharp edge of loss that had previously made such memories unbearable. I used to think that happiness meant returning to exactly who I was before, she confided to the circle as embers rose toward the star-filled sky. Now I understand it's about becoming who you're meant to be next. The words emerged with unexpected clarity, distilling the wisdom she had gained through months of physical and emotional challenge. Around her, heads nodded in understanding. Before retiring to her tent, Helena took a moment to stand alone at the edge of the campsite, gazing up at the silhouettes of mountains against the night sky. Stars scattered across the darkness like infinite possibilities, their light traveling across unimaginable distances, just as she had journeyed from despair to this moment of profound gratitude. The cool night air filled her lungs completely, a deep breath that seemed to contain all the freshness of new beginnings. As Helena prepared for sleep, her body pleasantly tired from the day's exertion, she reflected on the different kind of strength she had discovered, not just physical resilience, but the courage to reimagine a life that had seemed shattered beyond repair. The path had not been easy, marked by moments of doubt and setback, but each challenge had ultimately led her to this place of acceptance and even celebration of her transformed self. Sleep came easily, cradled in the profound silence of nature and the warmth of accomplishment. Helena's dreams were filled not with mountains lost, but with new horizons waiting to be explored, new heights of understanding and connection that had become possible only through navigating the deepest valleys of her experience. In this peaceful slumber, her body restored itself, preparing for whatever adventure tomorrow might bring.